tired, I am weak, and I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. Hear my cry, hear my call, hold my hand lest I fall. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home.
For as long as there have been babies born into this world, mankind has wondered about how life begins and develops in the womb.
This is your bladder, and this is your baby right here. He's jumping for you. Look at him.
Wow, I can't believe how developed he is. Look at him move.
Yeah, he's been well developed since 8 weeks. He's had all his parts. Look at him. Oh, look at you.
How come I can't feel that?
You won't until the 4th month, but he's been moving in there since 8 weeks. He's got a whole lot of room in the womb to move, and with all that fluid, they're able to move around, do somersaults. You know, look at him. Do you believe it? You're going to have your hands full, girl. Look at that.
The birth of a human life occurs at the moment of conception, when the mother's egg or ovum is fertilized by one of the father's sperm. During this act of conception, the two cells become a single living cell, a unique individual who never existed before in history and will never be duplicated again. Its heart begins to beat on about day 18.
This is an image of just 4 weeks. Can you see the heart beating? Listen to the Doppler of that heart.
They decided to create an environment where they would convince the blacks to severely limit the number of children they were going to have and thereby commit race suicide.
We have now reached a point in this country that the abortion industry at this point kills as many African American people every 4 days as the Klan killed in 150 years. And you can truly say the most dangerous place for an African American to be is in the womb of their African American mother.
Hello everyone, welcome to Love Them Both. This is a talk show on the growing crisis in our world and the sacredness of human life. And we also present documentaries on the escalating world crisis that we're in. Years ago, or in 2,400 years ago, in the book of Zechariah in the Bible, chapters 12 and 13, foretold that Christ would return at a time of strife over Jerusalem. In fact, he would draw all nations would be drawn there to battle, and his return would in fact be to rescue Jerusalem at that time. And that's is also good news for the world, because his return will mark preventing man from annihilating ourselves. And the events going on in our world should give everyone concern that how bad it is. In the 20th century, well, there was, until 1948, there was no Jewish state in Jerusalem for the nations to be drawn to, or for Christ to return to save. But that changed in 1948 with the rebirth of the State of Israel overnight. The return of the Jews under the Balfour Declaration after World War I began them coming back. In 1948, overnight, the State of Israel was reborn, and now that has provided a Jewish sovereign state to fulfill that prophecy of Zechariah, of all nations being drawn to Jerusalem. And we see that happening today too, as part of a process. Nations being, we call it the Middle East crisis, but in biblical terms, I would say the nations are being drawn to Jerusalem, and it will reach a climax someday. No one knows the day or the hour. So that's good news. It's good news and bad news. The bad news is the problems of our world are escalating so bad that man will annihilate himself, destroy ourselves, the Bible says, if God did not intervene. The good news is that by the return of Christ, he is going to intervene. And he's calling you, he invites us all to join with him now, to get on his team now, and be on his side when he comes. The Bible says that everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved, that if you seek him with all your heart, me with all your heart, I will be found of you. So there's good news, and you will be saved, the world will be saved. Those who repent will be saved and turn to God and have it better than ever. This show, on this show, we're dealing with a lot of the issues that are involved in this escalating time of world trouble. Today's show is going to be about the need to halt Islamic immigration to the United States, and really it should be halted to the West entirely. Other nations too. That's one of the issues. Before we go there, want to let you know that there will be on your screen at the bottom from time to time, you will see a pregnancy helpline. This is a pro-life show. You'll see a pregnancy helpline from time to time. If you're pregnant, and that's 24 hours nationwide, by calling that line. If you're pregnant and scared, you don't have to have an abortion. You can call that number and be put in touch with a confidential, free confidential counselor to help you through your situation. You can also be receive counseling, put in touch with a counselor for counseling about pains of past abortion and information to help you with the parenting decision of adoption. It's not adopting out a child is not an easy option, but it is a good option. It's a parenting option. It's something done for the welfare of the child. Abortion is not. You also see another major issue facing us today, the Health and Human Services Trafficking Hotline. This is a secure hotline where if trafficking is going on in plain sight around us, if you suspect someone involved in human trafficking, a victim, you could maybe slip them that number, that 3737 number, or you can call yourself. That's a confidential hotline that will you'll speak to people in Washington who can help you make a decision, help you make the best decision on how you can help this person with the information you have. It depends on how much information you have to work with on that. So those two numbers. With that, before we meet our guest today and start our topic, I want to say that the role of men is very important in this world, unfortunately. but a man has a choice. I feel a man has a choice. Boys have a choice. You can listen to your selfish nature, or you can or you can listen to the better angels and cultivate the better angel, compassionate, protective angel of your nature, side of your nature. It's there in everybody, and unfortunately our society is luring boys, and they become men then who only know how to be selfish. But you can change. There's always hope for change in God. With that, I want to watch this educational message, brief educational message, and this is the proper attitude of a man when he chooses the better angel. You can choose to follow the better angel of your nature and be protective toward women and children instead of being selfish. So we'll go to that now, please.
I'm wondering what you'll be when you grow up, what you'll do and where you'll go. On this road you'll travel far. There's one thing that you can know for sure. Your daddy's here and will love you. Caring and protecting daddy's girl is what I'll do. When your childhood is all through, when you leave and live out on your own, your daddy's here and will love you. Caring and protecting daddy's girl is what I'll do.
Pornography is not victimless. Real men defend women and children no matter whose daughters they are. Become a defender today.
Welcome back, everyone. Donald Trump has recently, at this time of the taping, introduced the subject of first illegal immigration in his campaign, and then after the attack and massacre of 14 or 15 people in San Bernardino by ISIS advocates, he called for a halt of Islamic immigration. And this is really, as he describes it, the press and that are just jumping them all over him for doing this, but this is really the practical thing to do. And so that's what our subject is going to be today, particularly about the need to halt Islamic immigration. I'll introduce our guest on the subject is Pastor, he is the president of Act for America Pittsburgh, the chapter of Act for America, which was founded by Bridget Gabriel a few years ago, after she left Lebanon because of the Muslim takeover there. And you are now leading that organization, local chapter, and
Yes.
people can contact this Facebook
Right.
they're going to see on the screen for and sign up to become participant with you.
Yes,
Well,
follow our posts and things like that, yes.
Okay. Let me introduce the subject a little bit here. Going to talk about halting Islamic immigration, and really I'll even touch on halting illegal immigration, why we should do that too. But before I do, I want to issue a kind of a disclaimer that while Islamic immigration needs to be halted, we're advocating doing this by principles and not threatening or abusing individuals. Insofar as possible, we here as Americans should, and especially as Christians, should treat all individuals respectfully and not threaten or what's those words, vandalize any mosque or anything like this. We want to do this lawfully and above board and through policy and through public opinion, not by being disrespectful to individuals. But we must be strong, as I would put it. We need to be strong but gentle. We need to be strong in speaking out for the halt of immigration. And if need be, God forbid, if we ever have to defend ourselves, we'd have to be strong in that. But basically, we want to try to be gentle to individuals, Muslim individuals and individuals of other origins. Someone might have described this as being like the hand of steel in a velvet glove. So I just want to lay that out to you. Donald Trump's reference to call for a halt, to at least a temporary halt of Muslim immigration, really, his campaign is good, I feel, in that it's bringing out the fact that we have too much immigration going on. And that's not good, because a house divided against itself cannot stand. A nation of Latins who are mostly, most of the illegal immigrants are Latins, we believe, or Muslims, and Americans really cannot endure. And I'll show you why I say that. We would have a country, if Islamic immigration continues, is allowed to continue, and the illegal immigrants already here from South America are allowed to remain, we will be forming a country of made of three could be divided into three smaller countries. The Americans here, the Latins, and then we'd have the Muslims too. And this type of country division would lead to a situation like they have up in Canada. They have the Quebec, the division between the French Canadians in Quebec and the English Canadians in the rest of the country. And this causes problems. It causes friction in the country, but every 15 or 20 years in Canada, they have to have a referendum and vote on whether or not they want to form two separate nations. Well, that's the type of thing that, in a minimum, that could happen here if we allow this type of unrestricted immigration to continue. Let's see. So you also have with the, it would tend to divide into America into smaller demographic but weaker demographic groups at a minimum. The illegal immigrants, for example, from Latin America, if they are allowed to stay here and become citizens, we know that there's good reason to believe that 80% of them would register and vote with the Democratic Party. And it would probably end the two-party system in this country. The Republicans wouldn't be able to win elections at all, I don't believe. So this is a serious, no country should be asked to subject itself to this kind of change, even involving just the illegal immigrants before we get to the Muslim immigration. One of this business of all this Muslim immigration and the illegal has brought out the fact that the purpose of immigration has changed in this country. They like to say, it's like to be said that we're hearing a lot now, people who argue for this really don't understand. They say this is the American way. We were a nation of immigrants. We allowed immigrants to come freely before. Why should we? This is our way. But that's not true. The last great wave of immigration was around the 1920s when Ellis Island allowed in poor people and needy people from other countries. But they were not stupid about it. They had quotas. Mainly the people at Ellis Island, in the American tradition of allowing immigration, was mainly to allow in immigrants who were compatible with the Protestant Christian society we have here, we already had here. Now they had quotas for people who they thought were might be incompatible with that from other parts of the world. They let some in, but they were conscious of that, of keeping the immigrant population compatible with the nation that was already here. So what we have happening today is the purpose of immigration has changed for a lot of these people. They're not coming to assimilate anymore. They're coming to carve out a enclave and live like they did back home, where they came from. And with the problems that I just cited, that this will divide the country. Another factor is that what happens here is we already have some other examples of Muslim immigration. In India, when the population grew in India to the point where it was uncontrollable, they separated into Pakistan. They actually formed a separate nation, Pakistan, just to separate the Muslims from the Hindus, from the Indians. population. So that's how serious it gets. That's what we will be heading toward here, that type of division and strife, if we continue to allow Islamic immigration. Let me add one other point here. The U.S. Constitution, another consideration is that the U.S. Constitution is like an agreement of how the people will be governed. Another thing about this new type of immigration, new purpose, these people are coming here to change the agreement. Muslims are coming here, as we will try to bring out today, they're coming here to change, to set up their religion and their law and push aside the U.S. Constitution ultimately. So the kind of, in the illegal immigrant population in California, Southwest, and some of the demonstrations that were on the media several years ago, in the past several years about that, they had Mexican flags. They would like to change the agreement too, apparently. So this is not the kind of immigration that America experienced in former centuries and at Ellis Island. So it's not fair to say that this unrestricted immigration is the American way. It really wasn't. So with that, wonder, do you have, is there anything, can you add anything to what I'm saying?
Well, I think to understand the immigration, the Muslim immigration we have today, you have to go back to the Quran, the life of Mohammed, the Sunnah, and learn what happened in the first years of Muhammad's life. And when we study that, I've read the Quran, and I've discovered in relationship to this topic that there is a concept called hijra. Hijra is what a Muslim would call holy migration. It is a call from Allah to move to a place where there are no Muslims and begin a Muslim population there. Now, the Quran itself has at least 17 verses that talk about this hijra. And for example, Surah 9:22. And there are several others like that. And so the Quran gives the basis for this holy migration. Every Muslim is being called by Allah to move to another place where there are no Muslims to start the Islamic expansion. Now, the theological basis for this is also that every Muslim, according to Muhammad and the Quran, believes that the earth belongs to Allah, and it is their responsibility to take back the world into Allah's possession. So this is a holy calling to move. So immigration, as we normally would understand it from our past experience, was that people would come to America to assimilate, to be Americans, and follow the Constitution. But that's not what hijra is, and that's not why most of the Muslims that are coming today to Europe and America are about. If you look at the pictures of the people that are coming, most of them are men. In fact, the United Nations itself took a study and a survey of the populations, the demographics of the Syrian refugees, and they're 74% males. Now, that's not your normal migration demographic. Mm-hmm. And so these men are responding to the Quran, to Muhammad, who himself was a migrant. When he started his religion in Mecca, he preached there and taught there for 10 years, had little success, caused quite a bit of trouble among the Meccans. That resulted in many of his followers being asked to leave town. And he would suggest that they go to places like Medina. And so from the beginning, hijra was part of Muhammad's doctrine to send people to other areas to plant Islam in other towns. Now, when Muhammad's protectors, his wife, hijra, and his uncle, Talib, died in 619, he had no protectors anymore. His tribe had turned against him, and he too had to get out of town.
That was Mecca. He had to leave Mecca.
He had to leave Mecca. And so when he went from Mecca in 620 to Medina, he was actually an immigrant. He became a migrant to Medina. But when he got there, he had people there that had come from Mecca before. And so he had a group of followers already there. And the interesting thing is that in the Quran, hijra is always associated with jihad. In at least 7 verses, they're directly connected. The Quran says to make hijra and jihad when you get there. So hijra and jihad are the same technique.
Let me interrupt you 1 minute. Keep that place, and ask the control room to bring up the still called the 5 charges of Islam. That'll be on the screen. The 5 charges are. You leave the 5 charges on a minute, please. For a while till I'm done. What I want to say about them, people will hear about the 5 pillars of Islam. These are the 5 devotions that individuals get into that get them loyal to Islam. It's the declaration of faith in Allah. It's the what else is it? It ends with the 5th one, prayer. The last one, the prayer, the daily prayers you see, pilgrimage at the end, one lifetime pilgrimage,
zakat, the donation,
like the tax,
and offerings.
Okay, so these are the 5 pillars of Islam. It ties the individual's loyalty into what Islam is about. But it doesn't end there. What I have on the screen is from this book here, written by Sam Solomon, a former Islamic, what do they call him, teacher, I can't think of the name, scholar, and who's been converted Christian, so he knows both sides of this problem. He was from Arabia, was there all along. But on the screen again, if you have the 5 charges. The first one is now through the five pillars of Islam, people get devoted to the processes. Now you come to the 5 charges, it organizes them into, and here's how it does it. The first responsibility toward the system is to assemble. It's talking about assemble in mosques, Islamic centers, particularly mosques, to listen. When you get there, listen. These are very obedient people. Obey. But if you'll notice, the 4th and 5th go together, and I have them capitalized and underlined. It's immigrate and jihad. This is to get to your point. Immigration is part of jihad.
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to put that on visually so that they can see that this is in the infrastructure of Islam.
Right. And so important is hijra, is that when Muhammad got to Medina, this was the beginning of the Islamic calendar. In other words, they weren't even taking record of the time before that. That's how important hijra is to the Islamic faith. So even before, let's say, military jihad, hijra, migration jihad, was being carried out by Muhammad and his followers. So it is a keystone. It is a primary building block. Now, once we understand that, we know that then we have to be careful about who's coming here for what purpose. Mm-hmm. If the Quran and all good devoted Muslims obey the Quran, if they are coming here for migration jihad, this is not a constitutional purpose for entrance into the United States.
Yes.
And so those people must be screened out in some way.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be a difficult job, but I think that the immigrants that came to our country swore allegiance to our country and the Constitution, and I don't think it's too much to ask that we ask of the same thing of Muslim migrants also, immigrants to our country.
Yes, okay. Now, to that point, there was a poll. I would have framed it this way: why should we, to answer the question, why should we ban all Islamic or Muslim immigrants? And one reason is that, let me go back a minute and explain the Sharia. The Sharia is the Sharia law or regulations that Mohamed instituted that are not, they don't satisfy the definition. They're not a religion as defined by the First Amendment of the Constitution. Sharia includes mandates for them to kill murder non-believers unless they convert. It has mandates for honor killings. It has mandates for polygamy. It has mandates for their own domestic courts, marriage courts in which women are abused and disadvantaged, that formulate countenance domestic violence, all sorts of things. This is the Sharia. We can call it this set of regulations. It does not qualify. It's not a religion as defined by the First Amendment. So it's because of the Sharia, Islam cannot be protected, should not be protected by the First Amendment, is not protected. It's not a religion. It actually, the Sharia involves violating a lot of our criminal laws, just by the examples I gave. So
I like to put it this way. Islam is as much religious as the skin of an orange.
Yes, I saw yours.
Is an orange.
Yes.
And so when we are bringing Muslims, devoted Muslims into our country, we're not just bringing a religion, we're bringing an ideology, we're bringing a culture, we're bringing a government, and a system of values that is basically not American. And so this makes the job very difficult to allow Muslims into our country.
And as we've been saying, jihad purpose is, whether it's violent jihad or non-violent jihad, because there are two types of jihad, it is to change, as I said before, the U.S. Constitution is an agreement about how the people will be governed. Well, these people are coming here, Muslims are coming here with the intention of changing the agreement. They're not coming here to assimilate. And I have a poll here that puts some little bit of concreteness to this, that the majority of Muslims, American Muslims, feel they should have the right to be governed by Sharia. Mm-hmm. And of course, that would be violation of our criminal laws. Mm-hmm. And this would be another reason why we should not allow mosques to form. Not license mosques and even close them down, because they're trafficking in Sharia, and which is a violation of criminal law. And it would be like allowing to allow mosques like that is to allow an establishment that, for example, traffics in stolen merchandise or something that's not legal in the country.
Sharia law, and that's one of the major tenets of any Muslim that wants to go to another country, is to establish Sharia law. For example, when Mohammed went to Medina, one of the first things he did was to make a treaty with the three Jewish tribes of Medina. And in my opinion, this was the first time he really tried to establish Sharia law. He pointed out the things in that, if you read that document, that treaty, you see there are rules for Muslims and there are rules for non-Muslims. And that is basically Sharia. And so Muslims that are following the Quran, that are following Muhammad, want to create a government within a government. And that's against our Constitution.
A sovereign state within a sovereign state, yes, yeah. By its own laws.
Right.
Let me call for, see where we're going here. How, you can imagine, well, some of the places where this has, it's not the first time Muslims have had to leave a country. They were, one of the, probably the most famous case that we can think of in Western history is they were finally, in 1492, the Moors, the Muslims were forced out of Spain after being there for several hundred years. Yeah. There was also the Greek and Turkish conflict more in modern times.
In the Balkans.
In the Balkans, yes. That they had, you were telling me what?
Well, in the 1800s, the Balkan nations went through a fight for independence. The Balkan countries were controlled by the Ottoman Empire at that time. And their fight for independence meant the Christians were trying to become independent from the Ottoman Empire.
Muslim Empire.
Muslim Empire, we would think of as Turkey right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so in those wars of independence, there were hundreds of thousands of Muslims that went from the Balkan countries back to the Middle East. They were invited to leave. Mm-hmm. And also vice versa. For example, after World War I, there were many Christians that came from Turkey to the Balkans, and again, Muslims went from the Balkan states to Turkey. And so as when the Muslims were pushed out of Spain, mm-hmm. it's not unprecedented for whole populations of Muslims to move when the time was they weren't acceptable in a country.
Yes, and with that in mind, I want to ask the control room. We have a clip of current and historic, too, Islamic conflicts going on. About 3 minutes long. May find this interesting, how widespread it is, why Muslim immigration always turns out to be such a problem. So if you can show that clip, please.
If we look at the tectonic plates between Islamic world and non-Islamic world today, we notice something very interesting, that even very diverse Muslim societies, which cannot be easily branded under one civilizational label, have something in common, and it is the tendency to be in conflict with their neighbors. If we look at the extreme southeastern outreach of Islam, we see East Timor, where Indonesian Muslims slaughtered a third of the population of this former Portuguese colony, who are, by the way, Roman Catholics. In southern Philippines, we see an extremely violent Islamic rebellion, which has been simmering and becoming more or less violent for years. In Indonesia itself, we had religious conflict in the Spice Islands, where the beleaguered Christian minority is in danger of extinction. We have very active Islamic movements, both in Thailand and in China, in Xinjiang. In the Indian subcontinent, the history is tragic indeed. That's where the Holocaust, the Hindu Holocaust, took place in medieval times, a little-known episode in the history of Islam in the Western world, but the one that left a deep traumatic mark on the people of the region, and where the conflict is still latently present in the province of Kashmir. In Africa, there is the constant war in Sudan, which finally has gained some prominence in the Western decision-making circles, but which has been going on for 20 years. And it's impossible to estimate the number of lives it has claimed, but it certainly goes into many hundreds of thousands. There is the constant instability in Nigeria between the resurgent central and northern states, which are increasingly pressurizing the government in Lagos into accepting Sharia law as the law of the land in those provinces. And of course there is Mauritania, where Muslims constantly battle non-Muslim southerners. Then there is of course the Caucasus, Chechnya, And in Europe itself, we have the conflict in the former Yugoslavia between the Bosnian Muslims and Serbs and Croats respectively, and the conflict between the Albanians and the Serbs, Albanians and Macedonians, and quite possibly before too long, Albanians and Greeks. So, if we eliminate these conflicts, if we eliminate from the equation Chechnya, the Balkans, Sudan, the world is a pretty peaceful place. If we eliminate...
Let me make a distinction on something.
Okay. Okay, welcome back, everyone. You were going to say?
In comparison, in terms of migration and immigration, as Christians, we learn from the Bible that when St. Paul would visit different lands, Corinth and Rome, he would encourage Christians to assimilate, to become part of the culture. And in fact, that's where we get that phrase, when in Rome, do as the Romans. This is part of our Christian teaching or doctrine, that when we go into an area, we don't establish an enclave or try to establish a separate government or keep ourselves isolated from the general population. We intend to assimilate into the population. This is not the intent of Islamic doctrine. They believe that the only way they can truly be a devout Muslim is to be in a solely Muslim environment. And so their natural tendency is always to accumulate in certain areas, grow enclaves that then become no-go zones, and then become independent governments within governments.
Yes, they form, I would describe it this way, they form separate, a separate society, congregating around mosques, and then what you said, as they grow in numbers, for example, these no-go zones, these Muslim enclaves are surrounding Paris a lot, and if Paris is on the, I have been told that Paris or France is on the verge of civil war because they have a lot of these Muslims in by this time. They thought they needed them as migrant workers, but it's probably turning out not to be worth the cost.
Right.
But,
these no-go zones too, that become Islamic enclaves, these are the breeding grounds for what we've started to call the lone wolves. Because if you have an Islamic enclave where everyone is Islamic, everyone is Muslim, there's no way of knowing who is becoming radicalized within that community. And so out of these areas come these lone wolves. And so to allow this, you create an environment where that kind of activity results, terrorism and other forms.
Well, we've already had several in United, noteworthy cases. The Boston bombers, the Sarnev, tragic case of the Sarnev brothers up there in Boston. San Bernardino, just the couple murdered 14 or 15 people there and injured more than. Then there was the Fort Hood shooter, a Muslim, who shot about 13 people and a pregnant woman down there.
And I think people don't realize too that the Boston Muslim bombers were immigrants. They were immigrants, and the wife of the San Bernardino murderers, she was also an immigrant.
Yes.
And so these kinds of things do happen among the immigrant population. In fact, they've done a study of Syrian refugees that says that 30% of them support ISIS.
Well, as the poll from the security, whatever it was I quoted, Center for Security Policy said the majority of Americans polled, Muslims polled, believe that it's their right, they want the choice of being governed by Sharia. And that's the majority of the immigrants you're going to let in. You get a lot of them in, the trouble grows. I mean, as the immigrant population grows.
ISIS itself has said they have planted 4,000 infiltrators into the Syrian refugee population. And so we know it exists, and the problem is, how do we sort that out? And as you mentioned, one way of beginning to solve that problem is to stop it. Yes. Until you come up with the kinds of systems that enable you to determine who wants to come to this country to be an American, who wants to come to establish another caliphate.
Tony
here.
Perkins of Family Research Council made this statement that religion should not be a basis for immigration. You know what I mean? It shouldn't be, what you want is people whose thinking, ideology is compatible with the country that's already here. Let me take a minute here and ask the audience, we have 2 30-second educational announcements for pregnant girls, probably unplanned pregnancy. So if you'll watch these, we'll be right back.
You're pregnant, but you don't want to be. You feel like you have no future. I get it. A year ago, the same thing happened to me. I was scared, just like you. But I also know that there are people you can talk to who won't judge you, who will keep everything confidential. And it's free. These people can help. So call now or go online today. I'm sorry you're going through this, but you'll make it.
So this pregnancy wasn't planned. It's gonna be okay. Really? So your baby's daddy gave you an ultimatum. It's me or the baby. Come on. That's not real love. A baby is a life you created. A baby that will love you and need you in return. There are people that will help you and services available. Call this number. You don't have to do this alone.
Welcome back, everyone. Well, this discussion we're having about the Muslim immigration, the fact that in polling, for example, the majority of American Muslims admit that they want the choice of being governed by Sharia law, and this implicitly means as opposed to American law. That fact, the fact that if you, by being a Muslim, I'm thinking here of moderate Muslims. People think they have different characteristics than terrorists, and I guess in some ways they do. But we hear reports over and over again that Bridget Gabriel, when Lebanon fell, when the moderate Muslims there who had been their neighbors and friends for years, they would turn on the Christians. And once the call, Allah Akbar, went out for the majority Muslim now to become dominant, they sided with the Muslims. It might have been out of fear of reprisal, but it was also partly, it also happens out of ideology too, because I know another example. In Canada, a woman lived up there, and I think it might have been French Canada, it might have been Quebec, but they lived in a Muslim enclave. They were Christian, lived in a Muslim enclave, but their kids went to school with the Muslim kids, and the Muslim kids would say, the Muslim kids talk, see, about what's going on. And the Muslim kids would say to the Christian kids, we won't kill you, you're good Christians, we won't kill you. These Muslim kids got this from home. You know, it was a constant thing, something being talked about in their families.
Well, I think it relates back to the number of Muslims that are permitted to come into the country to form these enclaves, because we do have moderate Muslims that don't have any intention to kill anyone in America. But once you have a population that's so great, it puts so much pressure on the moderate Muslims, and of course the more aggressive Muslims are the Type A Muslims, and the Type A's always are the ones that lead. Mm-hmm. And so it is a proportional coefficient. The more you allow to enter the country and to group and live in a certain area, the greater the pressure on the moderate Muslims becomes, and therefore you are just increasing the danger.
Very good point, very good point. Tony, a writer named David Daniels of Chick Publications, he asked the question, or answered the question, why didn't Muslims start this immigration a generation or two ago to the United States? And they say, he reported Muslims saying they were afraid to come here because they were afraid to have Muslims immigrate here then because they were afraid their members, their Muslims, would become Christians in the thriving Christian nation a generation or two ago. But they're not afraid anymore to come. So we've lost something, and it's something I think is part of the solution. Without the Christian nation, without God in our culture, there is a vacuum. And it's almost like a chastisement from God to let this come in and fill that vacuum if we don't return to it, I think.
Another reason, too, was, if you remember, immigration was stopped for 40 years in our country. And that was a lot due to the First and Second World War. And people forget that the Muslim Ottoman Empire sided with Germany and the Nazis during the First and Second World War. And so this country was not about to allow the immigration of Muslims from countries who we were fighting in wars.
Right, now today we would.
And now that that's over, the immigration begins again.
Mm-hmm. Very good points. The I had an idea there.
One thing, too, that is not often made clear is that there were 4 separate legislative bills passed by the United States Congress giving the president authority to stop certain groups of immigrants. And that bill did not say, well, you can't do that according to religion. No, that was an open executive order that a president could stop certain kinds of people, even religions, people of certain religions, to come into our country if the president felt it was a risk to national security. And so the whole idea that's being presented that this is against our nature, this is not who we are, this is not American, is totally false. It's a lie. It's a myth being perpetuated by those who want to shame people into looking bad because they want to just stop it for a while and take a good look at what's happening.
Wow. Okay, we have about 2 minutes left. I just want to touch again on the Christian nation, that we were blessed as long as when we turned that corner in 1962 and changed our policies, took prayer and Bible study out of the schools, the 10 Commandments out in 19, and just generally publicly stopped acknowledging God, the Bible, and have gotten into all of this kind of experimentation with this unchecked immigration, unwise immigration. Part of this, in other words, I believe we need to stop immigration, the Muslim immigration, and probably do something about the illegal immigrants too, better than we're doing. Because, as I said, I believe they would eliminate the Latin immigrants would eliminate the two-party system, I believe. And that would change America too.
One thing about Islamic doctrine is this too. Because they believe Allah has all of the world, owns all of the world, Islam is basically an open borders religion. Mm-hmm. They do not believe in borders because all borders are non-believers' restrictions.
They wouldn't believe in what we call nation states then. That's
exactly.
Very true, yes.
Exactly. And
well, we're running out of time here. Been a very good discussion, very enlightening discussion for me. I've learned some good new things. Okay, I want to thank you for coming, being here. Maybe we can do this on other aspects of this topic. lessons that can be learned from France. And with that, I'm going to ask you to watch the show. Lord willing, we'll be taping more shows, and we'll see you next time. Continue watching.
Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, help me stand. I am tired, I am weak, and I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. When my way grows drear, precious Lord, linger near. When my life is almost gone, hear my cry, hear my call, hold my hand, lest I fall. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. Take my hand,